Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to take a look at the Olaf and Swain mid-scope updates that Riot have posted on the PBE. They've been up there for a couple of days, but I'm finally getting to this and taking a look at the changes Riot have in store for these two champions. There is intended to be a third. Talia is also on the board for a mid-scope update, but there were some problems with Riot getting that onto PBE, and so she is going to be held for a later date. So that leaves us with these two at the moment, but both of these changes I'm really excited to talk about, guys. For context, these are going to be changes of a scope similarly to the Xin Zhao or Tahm Kench or Sona changes before them, in that they are intended to sort of revitalize some older champions, make them feel a little bit better in the current state of League of Legends design, and potentially fix some overarching design problems that they've had potentially since their release, as is the case with Olaf. Speaking of Olaf, let's go ahead and hop into his changes right away and kind of talk through what Riot's goals are. Now, a lot of these changes are intended to remove some of Olaf's power and problematic aspects in pro play specifically. Pro play has had historically a problem with balancing Olaf, especially given that Olaf's been one of those characters where if he's balanced for solo queue, he takes over pro. If he's balanced for pro, he cannot get played in solo queue because that's just how punishing he can be. And I think Riot have had a very good idea about how to balance Olaf and allow him to make use of a lot of the Juggernaut-focused items that came out a couple of seasons ago with the Mythic Forge update. The biggest things here for me about Olaf are that he theoretically can have infinite uptime in Ragnarok. Now, Ragnarok's duration was decreased to 3 seconds from 6, which is a big deal. It means that Olaf really has to get stuck in within that very small window of activating Ragnarok, but now whenever Olaf hits a champion with a basic attack or his E, it extends the duration of Ragnarok to 2.5 seconds, and this can refresh indefinitely. This means that Olaf, once he presses R, really has the ability to get stuck in, and once he's stuck in, he basically will never run out of Ragnarok unless champions can open up a gap long enough for the duration of the ability to wear off. Definitely a hugely impactful ability now, and one that will make Olaf very scary in melee versus melee matchups. This does come with a very small change here to Undertow. Obviously, you don't want a champion that's completely immune to crowd control and also has a spammable slow just running you down and being impossible to ever escape from. So the minimum distance on Olaf's Q was increased very slightly to give Olaf more of a decision as to whether or not to stay on top of the enemy champion and keep hitting them to keep Ragnarok going, or to go pick up his axe to potentially keep slowing them, but maybe he isn't able to get back in range to hit enemy champions to keep Ragnarok going. There's a bit more tension in that version of the kit now, but I really like this change overall to Olaf's play pattern and making him a little bit easier to get stuck in and really be that berserker that we all know and love him for. Speaking of being a berserker, Olaf now doesn't have lifesteal on his W anymore. That has been moved over to his passive. So Olaf now gains maximum attack speed and lifesteal based on his missing health, and both of these bonuses will cap out at 30% maximum health as opposed to going all the way down to 99% missing health, right? So Olaf will get his maximum benefits a lot sooner, and he'll be able to actually use them, and he just has innate lifesteal built in, which means that Olaf is less dependent on his sort of two steroid buttons, his W and his R, where he presses those, he's really powerful, and then they both wear off and he just dies instantly. That's no longer really the case of Olaf now, because he can keep in Ragnarok indefinitely, and he always has his lifesteal as long as he's hitting things and low on health. Really like these changes and the direction Riot have taken. Vicious Strikes, his W, does have some small changes here. It gives less attack speed overall, but this is sort of irrelevant because he has attack speed from his passive to kind of help compensate. But Olaf also now gains a shield upon activation. This is a big deal because it gives Olaf some of that upfront durability to avoid the damage as he's trying to get stuck in. It gives him a lot of attack speed to automatically start hitting people and keep Ragnarok alive the second he gets stuck into a fight. Obviously, it doesn't give him the amplified healing or lifesteal anymore, but I really like this ability as sort of an update. Riot are talking about changing the name as well, which is kind of interesting, but either way, really like this. Finally, Olaf's Undertow now has an armor shred percentage on it as well, in order to make the argument as to whether or not to pick up the axe or not a little bit more relevant. So Olaf now can think of, it's not just about the slow, sometimes it's about the armor shred and keeping that on champions as well. Overall, I think these changes are going to be a really big deal for making Olaf feel like a much better champion and more of like the drain tanks that he's sort of competing with. Things like Aatrox, for example, who's really much so, as long as he's hitting things, he's keeping himself alive. But Aatrox has the ability of having AoE to kind of give him big bursts of heal, and Olaf never really had that. So I really like these changes, giving him CC immunity, the ability to keep running people down with a spammable slow, and just innately built lifesteal, so he's no longer dependent on Vicious Strikes to keep him alive. Really big fan of these changes, though. I am a little concerned about how Riot are going to keep this balanced, given that you, again, have a CC immune champion with a spammable slow running you down and just hitting you constantly. That could be potentially problematic, but big fan of these changes overall. Moving on to the Swain changes, and these are likely to be very contentious, especially for the Swain community, and especially for the Swain support community, as Swain can no longer right-click you to drag you back if you are crowd-controlled. This is a big deal because Swain, the ability to have guaranteed automatic follow-up crowd control to any other CC ability that landed, regardless of how short a duration it was huge. That ability was so powerful, and I think it ate up a very large percentage of Swain's power budget, and the fact that Riot have removed it off of his passive is a big deal because it means that he no longer has access to that. Just right-click, and I apply a huge crowd control effect to you, regardless of how small the original crowd control effect on you was. Now, he does still keep the pull. It is now a reactivation bonus on his E. So essentially he casts it, then he can reactivate it to pull all champions rooted by his E. So he still has it, but it's only for his own crowd control. Nevermove being a fairly slow and telegraphed skill shot makes it significantly harder to actually get. Either way, though, big fan of that change in particular, and it's opened up Swain to all sorts of other bonuses. He gets significantly more healing later in the game for picking up soul fragments. He gets more health per soul fragment. He gets 12 health as opposed to 5 per soul fragment, which is a big deal. Death's Hand is basically buffed across the board. Mana cost down, cooldown down, damage increased, and now there's a base damage on additional bolt damage, meaning that if you hit someone with every single bolt of Swain's Death's Hand, you basically just kill a guy. It's a ton of damage if you're able to get that sort of point-blank Q off, which is going to make Swain more of a better into melee champions that have no choice but to be directly in front of Swain. The biggest changes here, though, are to Swain's R. Now, Swain, the cooldown was dramatically decreased. Swain will have access to Demonic Ascension quite often, but now instead of lasting 12 seconds, upon casting it, Swain gains 50 demon power, which drains over time, but while draining champions, Swain gains demon power per second, which means that Swain can, again, theoretically stay in Demonic Ascension forever, similarly to Olaf. As long as he's sucking an enemy champion, he will never run out of his ultimate, and after 3 seconds, Swain can recast his ultimate to cast Demon Flare, which the damage on that has been increased. It now slows enemies by 60%, and casting Demon Flare does not stop Demonic Ascension. This is a big deal. I think previously Swain has really had to choose between whether or not he wants to go for a big burst of damage to potentially kill enemies, or if he wants to keep the ultimate around that's basically keeping him alive, right? Now he doesn't have to make that choice, and in fact Demon Flare is a way for Swain to continue to run down enemy champions that may be about to escape his reach. He can pop his Demon Flare, slow them by 60%, and keep them in range for him to continue slurping. Really big fan of these changes, and I think what they're going to do is make Swain feel more like an AP juggernaut, which I think is always kind of how players have wanted to treat Swain, as opposed to this sort of like squishy AP mage who plays in the bot lane and is able to pull you backwards off of something like a Draven E, right? That I think was a little cheesy, and I'm a big fan of these changes and where they're at for Swain. Obviously, he did take some decent power hits, but I think he's more than compensated for in the more fun parts of his kit, namely his Q and his R. So that is going to be it for me today, guys. Let me know what you think of these changes down in the comments, especially if you are a Swain or Olaf player. I'd love to hear your guys' feedback on where you think these changes are going and what potential pitfalls you see from these changes if Riot actually go through with them. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.